Sometimes a single conversation can change everything. It can reveal a reality so different from what you believed that it shakes you to your core. I am a storyteller, a broadcaster, and a student of history. But there was one day, many years ago, when I was not the one asking the questions. Instead, I was told a truth so profound and unsettling that it has shaped my understanding of the world ever since. It happened in the most powerful room on earth, the Oval Office. This is not just a story about a meeting between a radio host and a president. It's about the very nature of power in America. It all began with a phone call, an unexpected invitation that led to one of the most chilling conversations of my life. In the late 2000s, our nation was divided over the Iraq War. I had become a vocal critic, using my radio platform to question why we were still there. One day, the White House called. President George W. Bush wanted to see me. I was shocked. I wasn't a supporter, I was a critic. The invitation felt more like being called to the principal's office than an honor. On the day of the meeting, I was escorted through the hushed halls of the White House, bracing for confrontation. For about an hour, President Bush defended his decisions and made it clear he wasn't pleased with my commentary. I listened, stood my ground, and thought that was the end of it. But as I prepared to leave, the most important and terrifying part of the conversation began. What happened next would change my understanding of power in America forever. The real lesson was about to be revealed. As I stood to leave the Oval Office, the gravity of the conversation still lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. The room, with its historic walls and silent portraits, seemed to close in around us, amplifying the tension of the moment. I brought up Senator Obama's recent statements about sending planes into Pakistan, referencing the heated debates and the growing anxiety in Washington about America's next steps on the world stage. I expected President Bush to echo my concern, to share in the unease that so many of us felt about the unpredictable future and the risks of escalating conflict. Instead, he paused, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the presidency pressed down on him. He looked at me, eyes tired but clear, and said, "Trust me, Glenn, whoever comes into this office, they're going to be advised by exactly the same people that have been advising me." He went on to explain, almost resigned, that these advisors, career officials, intelligence experts, military brass, would tell the next president that there is no alternative, that their hands are tied, and that this is the only path forward. It wasn't just about one or two influential voices, but an entire apparatus. A deeply entrenched system that persists regardless of who sits behind the resolute desk. In that moment, the president was quietly admitting that, in some of the most critical decisions, he wasn't fully in control. The machinery of government, vast and unyielding, often moved on its own momentum. I left the White House in a daze, the echo of that quiet warning following me out into the cool evening air. The realization settled in. The true power in Washington might not always be visible, but its influence was undeniable. It was a rare, unsettling glimpse behind the curtain, a permanent class of advisors and officials guiding the ship of state, steady and relentless, no matter who the captain is or what promises were made to the public. The president's words weren't a complaint nor an excuse, but a sober statement of fact, a reality that few outside those walls ever truly understand. In that moment, I realized just how easily the will of the people could be overruled by unelected, unseen forces, shaping the nation's destiny from the shadows, regardless of who holds the highest office in the land. The president's warning introduced me to what many now call the deep state. It's not a secret society, but the permanent bureaucracy, unelected officials, career civil servants, intelligence agencies, and diplomats who remain in power no matter who is elected. When a new president arrives, they bring a few thousand appointees, but millions of federal employees stay. These are the experts and advisors Bush meant. They have their own long-term goals and priorities, often believing they know better than elected officials. This permanent government has its own inertia, relationships, and plans. When a new president tries to change course, they often face resistance from this entrenched bureaucracy. President Bush's warning was clear. This group is so powerful that even the president has little choice but to follow their lead on critical issues. It's a government within the government, hidden in plain sight. Leaving the White House, my view of American power was forever changed. The idea that the president is more manager than chief executive was unsettling. The true direction of the country was being steered by hands not chosen by the people. Our votes seemed to matter less than we believed. We could vote for change, but the permanent state could override it. It felt like grand theater. The actors on stage weren't really in control. This realization didn't make me a cynic, it made me a watchman. My mission became exposing this hidden structure and warning the American people. The real struggle wasn't left versus right, but the people versus a permanent, unelected class. My Oval Office encounter opened my eyes to the true battle for America's future. For years I watched presidents come and go, each one stepping into the Oval Office with their own ambitions, their own promises, and their own unique approach to the immense responsibilities of the job. Some entered with the weight of history on their shoulders, others with the hope of changing the course of the nation. But no matter who they were, there always seemed to be a familiar rhythm to their time in office, a pattern that repeated itself, administration after administration. I saw the patterns Bush described, the subtle influence of long-serving officials, the quiet pressure to conform, and the invisible boundaries that seemed to shape every decision. Presidents would often talk about bold change, but the machinery of government had a way of grinding down even the most ambitious plans. Then, in 2016, Donald Trump was elected, a true outsider, someone who had never held public office or served in the military, and who had built his reputation in the world of business and entertainment. His campaign was unconventional, and his victory shocked the political establishment. He didn't owe his career to the establishment and didn't listen to the usual advisors. Trump was not beholden to the traditional power brokers in Washington, and he made it clear from the start that he intended to do things his own way. Trump led with his own ideas and instincts, often relying on his gut rather than the carefully crafted talking points or the advice of seasoned political operatives. He was willing to break with precedent, to challenge the status quo, and to take risks that others would have avoided. He was determined to implement his agenda regardless of what the bureaucracy thought, pushing forward even when faced with resistance from within his own administration. For Trump, compromise was often seen as weakness, and he preferred confrontation over consensus. This, I believe, is why he faced relentless opposition from the moment he was elected. The pushback was immediate and intense, not just from political opponents, but from the very institutions that were supposed to serve the president. The deep state, those entrenched elements of government that operate behind the scenes, saw him as a threat to their power and plans. They were unaccustomed to a leader who refused to play by their rules. He wasn't playing by their rules or taking their advice. Instead, he often dismissed the council of experts, choosing instead to trust his own judgment, even when it put him at odds with those around him. The leaks, bureaucratic battles, and investigations seemed designed to paralyze his presidency. Every day brought new headlines, new controversies, and new attempts to undermine his authority. Trump openly called out the swamp and made it his mission to drain it. He spoke directly to the American people, promising to root out corruption and return power to the voters. For a time, America had a leader who was actually leading, someone who was not content to simply manage the status quo, but who was determined to shake things up for better or worse. He made decisions based on his promises, not on what was politically convenient or what the permanent bureaucracy wanted. His supporters saw this as a refreshing change, a sign that someone was finally listening to them. He wasn't following a script from unelected holdovers, but writing his own story, one that often clashed with the expectations of Washington insiders. Whether you agree with his policies or not, it's impossible to deny that Trump's presidency forced the country to confront uncomfortable truths about how power really works in Washington. His leadership style was fundamentally different from those who came before him, and it left a mark on the office that will be studied for years to come. He showed it's possible to resist the permanent state, to challenge the entrenched interests that have long shaped American policy from the shadows. But he also revealed just how powerful and vicious that system can be when it feels threatened. The backlash was fierce, and the struggle played out in public view, day after day. The contrast between Bush's quiet warning and Trump's loud battle was a stark lesson in the realities of power. In the end, Trump's approach changed the conversation about what it means to lead and what it costs to challenge the system. Today, the story of my meeting with President Bush is more relevant than ever. Many Americans feel their government isn't listening. The president's warning explains why fundamental problems never seem to get solved. Because the elected aren't always the most powerful, the struggle for control of our government is ongoing. We see it in foreign policy, like Trump's peace negotiations with Ukraine, which clashed with the permanent state's long-term agenda. We see it in domestic policy, like debates over election integrity where career officials defend the status quo. The real question: does the president have the authority to make changes, or does the permanent state get the final say? Understanding this hidden power structure empowers you, the citizen. Recognize when a president is being undermined and question why certain policies never change. Knowing this is the first step toward holding the system accountable and reclaiming power for the people. The final lesson from that day in the Oval Office is both a warning and a call to action. What I witnessed wasn't just a moment in history, it was a glimpse into the machinery of power that shapes our nation, often out of sight. We tend to imagine that the president alone steers the ship of state, but the reality is far more complex and far more troubling. The greatest threat to our republic is not always loud or obvious, it's the quiet, steady erosion of our democratic principles from within, an invisible force that chips away at the foundations of our freedom. This threat doesn't come from foreign enemies but from the slow decay of accountability and transparency right here at home. Power is shifting from the people we elect to those we don't. Decisions that affect millions are increasingly made behind closed doors, by individuals whose names you may never hear, whose faces you may never see. My advice is simple but urgent. Pay attention not just to the president but to the powerful figures who are never on the ballot. These unelected officials, advisors, and bureaucrats wield enormous influence, often shaping policy and guiding the direction of our country without public scrutiny. These are the people who whisper in the president's ear and execute policy, often with little accountability. Their decisions can have lasting consequences, yet they rarely answer directly to the American people. We must demand to know who they are and what they're doing in our name. Democracy only works when citizens are vigilant, informed, and unafraid to ask tough questions of those in power. True expertise is valuable, but in a republic it must serve the will of the people, not the other way around. We must remember that our government exists to serve us, not to rule over us from the shadows. The only antidote to the so-called deep state is an informed, active citizenry, one that refuses to be complacent, that seeks out the truth, and that holds every public servant accountable, no matter their title or position. The story of my meeting with the president was a wake-up call for me. Let it be one for you as well. It's a reminder that the fight for our republic is ongoing and that each of us has a role to play in defending it. Who really holds power in America? The answer to that question will determine the future of our freedom, our democracy, and the legacy we leave for generations to come.